My name is Rodney and we're here today in the Gathering Place in Lee Square with Tri-Cities Community Television, and we're joined with Dr. Amy Lubic. One of the themes that are very close to my heart is community engagement, and oftentimes, for those of us that do organize within the community, there are many barriers that we have to face, and I'm really glad to see someone like Amy, who was involved recently in 2 days of action, one on electoral reform and one on the Kinder Morgan pipeline. Going ahead despite many challenges, and from what I understand, you had a lovely turnout and you also were able to produce some effect. So before we begin, could you just tell us a bit about yourself and the work you do in the community?
Sounds good. Well, thank you so much for having me, Rodney, and Tri-Cities TV. I am an environmental researcher by trade, but I volunteer for a lot of organizations in the Tri-Cities, including the Tri-Cities Lead Now, Force of Nature, Fair Vote Canada, and I'm also part of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment and the Public Health Association of BC. And very recently, at the beginning of December, there were 2 back-to-back days of action that happened right here in Port Coquitlam at Ron McKinnon's office. And we had a fantastic turnout, despite, I think, minus 10 or something like that weather. And it's wonderful to see people come out and really, because they really believe in these issues.
And from what I understand, it wasn't just happening in this constituency, it was across the country?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there was, like as I said, there were 2 literally back-to-back days of action. The first was a national day of action with Lead Now and Fair Vote Canada and the Vote Better Alliance, which was talking about electoral reform and holding our current Liberal government to their promise of making this the last, or the 2015 election, the last first-past-the-post election. And there were over 60, I believe, actions across the country where people came out from, I think it was 200 people in some places to just 5 in others, in order to deliver the words that the Liberals had in their platform around electoral reform. And right after the presentation of those words to our Liberal MPs here in Port Coquitlam, we had a almost anti-rally, which was really cool. We had a thank you rally to our Member of Parliament, Ron McKinnon, because he was one of the only MPs that actually stood up publicly and said he did not want the Kinder Morgan pipeline in his community because of what the constituents came and told him. So we were very grateful to him for his dedication and gumption, I suppose, to stand up for what the community really believes in.
To expand upon the first topic that you mentioned, electoral reform, I've heard some critiques, especially from the conservative side of the benches, that the party in power simply does not have the mandate to make any changes to the current electoral system that we have. Do you believe that the party has a mandate?
I do. This party came in promising for electoral reform, and they came in with a majority government. One of the problems with our current electoral system is the majority of the government didn't necessarily get more than 50% of the vote, which is what most people would consider a majority. But they now have the power to instill what they promised in their campaign. And so I really do believe that they have a mandate to go forward. A lot of people in this current election voted strategically. That was a message that came out. And a lot of the parties were actually using strategic voting in their messaging, depending on what riding they were in, if it was a close race. Even though they don't necessarily believe in strategic voting, if they thought their candidate had the best chance strategically, they were using that messaging. Fair Vote actually had its volunteers go to every candidate in the ridings that they had volunteers in to ask if they would be for proportional representation or electoral reform. And most of the candidates from the Green Party, the NDP, and the Liberals had said to the volunteers that we would at least consider proportional representation. So I think I really do believe that the Liberals have the mandate to go ahead.
So if they have the popular vote, they have the mandate, they have an all-party committee that voted in favor, or its recommendations were in favor of electoral reform, and why are they still hesitant?
I think that depends on who you ask. One of the positions that's been put forward is that the Liberals did come in under this system. And because they are more of the middle-of-the-road centrist party than the other ones, that first past the post has got them to a majority government. And so, it's all well and good to say we don't want this system of election when that system's not working for you. But when the system is working for you, then maybe you don't want to change it as much as you thought you did. That's only one thing that's been put forward. There are some folks that have put forward that they don't want to have electoral reform because that will make the conservative voters very angry if they do that, and so they'll vote conservative, and then we'll have a conservative government again. However, I really believe if we could bring in something like proportional representation, that does mean that governments have to be more collaborative within the parties. And potentially then the Conservatives would have to work with the other parties, as they have actually in this committee on electoral reform. So, yeah, I still believe that they do have the mandate to go forward and make the changes that they promised they would do.
Recently, I would believe only a couple of days ago, Miri Monsef, who was the former minister, was replaced by Karina Gould. What do you think this signals to the voters? Do you believe that this is just going to remain a precarious portfolio where, so long as the government doesn't actually support the idea of electoral reform, that these ministers will simply be fodder? Or do you feel that the new minister will have the skills and the experience necessary to take control of the portfolio that many believe that Monsef failed to do, and successfully usher forth a form of electoral reform that will represent what citizens of Canada want?
That's a very good question. It's a tough question. On one hand, Elections Canada has said that they need at least 2 years to put in a new system. So there isn't a lot of time left for them to make the decision on what new system we would have if we want to make this the last first past the post election system. So to bring in a new minister that's not prepped, who has said already that she can't repeat the words that were in the Liberals' platform until she's really briefed and knows what she's up against and what she's doing. And understandably, we want her to feel like she's comfortable and confident. At the same time, it seems like if for the last 2 years, Mary Monsef has been leading this, to have a cabinet shuffle so close to basically your deadline kind of signals that you really don't want this to happen in the first place. At the same time, the survey that was put out by Monsef got a lot of bad press. The My Democracy survey did not, a lot of critics said anyway, did not really point Canadians in the direction of which form of electoral reform do you want? Are you in favor of electoral reform? And said nothing about proportional representation, which is what the committee found was most favorable to the majority of Canadians. So on one hand, I can't say that I thought that before Elio was handled particularly well. On the other hand, bringing in a new minister doesn't make me fantastically confident that it will make things happen with better progress.
Because we're running out of time, I have one final question. Do you personally believe that the Liberal government will honor its promise that it made to the voters the last election, or do you feel like this will be a part of a future campaign promise that they will make when they run again in the next election?
That's a very tough question. I don't know what I believe at this particular moment. I'm not fantastically hopeful, and I really wanted to be hopeful with this particular government. I'm naturally someone who tries to vote my conscience and vote the way that I think is going to move the country forward and make things better for the majority of people. And so I was really hoping that the Liberal government would represent that. Even though I did support strategic voting in my riding. I hope that the Liberal government will keep their promise. This move that they've made doesn't make me very hopeful of it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
This community program would not be possible without the financial support of our corporate sponsors and community members. Tri-Cities Community Television would like to especially thank the cities of Port Moody, Coquitlam, and Port Coquitlam for their belief and support of community television. If you wish to be part of our volunteer team, become a sponsor, or make a financial contribution to support community programming, please feel free to contact us at the following location.